This time it's 5 classic British bikes with overhead cam engines. In general, when we think about British singles of the classic era, we're thinking about overhead valve big thumpers that don't produce a great deal of power and kind of lumber around. But it should be forgotten that they also produce some very fine overhead cam sporting models too. And here are 5 of them. The Excelsior Mansman. Now the name of this motorcycle may cause a little confusion for American viewers, there being after all at least 2 American companies called Excelsior at one time or another. However, the British versions of the name were produced by Messrs Bayliss and Thomas at the very dawn of the motorcycle industry, so predating both the American companies. The company was founded in 1874 and during the 1870s and 1880s were one of the first British companies to produce bicycles. But in 1896 they began importing Minerva engines from Belgium and fitting them in their bicycle frames, making them one of the first manufacturers ever to produce a motorcycle in Great Britain. The company was, however, relatively small, so had to use customer engines throughout its existence, with 1 or 2 rare exceptions of course. During the 20s and 30s they had no engine manufacturing facilities, so would design engines and have them constructed by companies such as Blackburn. One very notable example of this was the Mechanical Marvel, so called. This TT-1 single featured 4 radial valves operated by individual push rods, and although effective, it was far too complex and expensive to mass produce to be used as a production machine. The company needed something simpler they could sell to clubman racers, and this would be the Manxman. The Manxman used a bevel drive single overhead cam with 2 valves per cylinder, and was produced in 250, 350 and 500cc forms from 1935 until the outbreak of World War II. In 250 form it ran a 249cc engine with a bore and stroke of 67 by 70.6, and in 1936 the machine even included a 4-valve head, which took the bike to second place in 1936 and 1937 at the lightweight TTs. But despite its name, the Manxman never actually won a TT race, but would go on to be a popular choice for privateers and club racers, being available in both road and race forms. The machine featured a 4-speed gearbox, had plunging suspension in the rear and girder forks at the front. All in weight was 132 kilos or 291 pounds for the 250 and 152 kilos, 335 pounds for the 350. After the war, engine manufacturer Blackburn was getting out of the bike building business, so Excelsior would have to develop their own, and development of a new version of the Manxman with a chain-driven single overhead cam was put in hand, but unfortunately nothing came of it. The AJS K7 and K10. Albert John Stevens was one of 5 brothers who would go on to found the AJS Motorcycle Company, although initially they started out as engine manufacturers only, producing their first units in 1897, and having their engines commercially available for others to fit into their bicycles from 1901 onwards. These engines were mostly small capacity single cylinder units, but they did produce some parallel twins too, just in case you thought Triumph got there first. However, by 1909 the company was producing complete motorcycles of its own, from a small facility in Retreat Street, Wolverhampton, and the new company was quick to realise the potential of competition to help sell the machines, producing initially a range of sporting side valves before replacing them with the Big Port in 1923. This was an overhead valve 350 which produced some 20 horsepower. However, at the end of the 20s the bike would be replaced by a single overhead cam unit, the K7, and for 1929 the Cami would be much improved, giving better performance and now including a 4-speed gearbox. And this machine would propel Wal Hanley to second place in the 1929 Junior TT, and this would soon be followed by second places in the German TT and the Dutch TT at Assen, before the machine would finish first and second at the Ulster Grand Prix in 1929. The machines had both cast iron head and barrels, and featured a 4-speed hand-change gearbox, and all up weight was around 260 pounds. The fuel tank was of dual pannier type rather than a saddle tank, having fuel on one side and oil for the engine in the other, running a total loss lubrication system. The 350 K7 was of 349 cc's, with the 500 K10 was of 498cc. But unfortunately these were tough times in the industry, and in 1931 AJS would file for bankruptcy, the name being purchased by the Collier brothers at Matchless to create AMC or Associated Motorcycles. And under the AMC banner there would be a replacement for the K7, with the 350 AJS 7R being introduced in 1948. But this Phil Walker design was a very different beast from the original machine, but was designed with the same basic principle of providing the clubman rider with an effective machine. The Matchless G50. The Matchless G50 was a 500cc overhead cam racer designed by Phil Walker and was essentially their 7R350 model enlarged to 500cc's, or actually 496cc's, in 1958. The machine weighed in at 320 pounds or 150 kilos dry and produced 51 horsepower at 7,200 RPM, the engine weight being reduced for the use of magnesium alloys on many of the engine's cases, and this would necessitate the use of a gold protective paint, giving the engine a very distinctive look. Like its smaller brother, the engine would make use of a 4-speed transmission of AMC's own design. The engine would be used in a Clubman Racer G50, but also in a scrambler based on the G80 CS. And when in 1963 the AMA banned the machine from its event, not being a road-based engine after all, AMC simply built a limited run of road-going versions. Unfortunately, financial problems at AMC would end production in 1963, but that was not the end for the G50. In 1966, Colin Seeley would use the engine to power his Grand Prix races using a very distinctive and very lightweight frame. And this would prove to be a very effective clubman racer for riders such as Peter Williams in the late 60s and early 70s, where the machine would prove very effective against other bikes with much more modern power units. The Norton International. The Norton International first appeared in 1932 and was available essentially as a fast road-going TT replica roadster and also as a clubman racer too. The engine was a development of the earlier CS1 Pure Racer and ran a bore and stroke of 79 by 100. The bevel drive overhead cam motor made use of hairpin valve springs, and the engine also features an aluminium head and barrel. Early machines used Sturmey Archer gearboxes, but this would later be replaced by a Berman unit. The 38 model with that aluminium head and barrel was fitted into an all-new frame with plunger rear suspension, earlier models of course being rigid rear. Post-war bikes featured iron head and barrels to cut costs, but would feature road-holder telescopic front forks, although the chassis itself was still the plunger frame job. But there would be post-war upgrades to the machine despite its age, including 1947 when the close ratio gearbox was now fitted as standard, and in 1950 the bike would once again feature an aluminium head and barrel, but the final major improvement would come in 1953 and the introduction of the featherbed frame, resulting in perhaps the definitive Norton Inter. This machine would reign for only a couple of years however, with production engine in 1955, although small batches of machines would be produced for another 2 or 3 years after that date. The Velocette KSS. Velocette is perhaps one of the best known producers of big British singles, being founded by German migrants, the Goodman family, in 1904. The machines were originally called Veloce motorcycles. However, in 1913 the company would introduce a lightweight 2-stroke, which they dubbed the Velocette. The machine was so popular that the name became synonymous with the brand, and thereafter all machines would be called Velocettes. In 1925 they would introduce the KSS series, essentially a race replica, although the bike would go on to be tuned and used for racing in its own right. The engine would basically be available in 2 forms, the Mark I running between 1925 and 1935, and the Mark II from 35 to 48. In all forms the engine is a 348.4cc engine with a bore and stroke of 74 by 81mm. As dry stump lubrication, and early models made use of a 3-speed hand change gearbox. A 4-speed foot change would later replace this. Early models would make around 19 horsepower, although later machines would make around 25. The machine weighed in at 120 kilos or 265 pounds, and fully race-tuned versions were said to be capable of around 90 miles an hour. The machines were used by Alec Bennett to win the 1926 Junior TT, and in 1927 Harold Willis was second, and in 1928 Bennett won once again, with Willis second. And that 1928 victory would come courtesy of the first positive stop gearbox fitted to a motorcycle, handing Velocet an enormous advantage in terms of time over the whole TT lap, when compared to the then standard hand change systems. And this machine would lead to the development of the KTT racers. The Mark II KSS of 1935 would see a significant upgrade, with a strengthened chassis and fully enclosed valve gear, and this would be the definitive version of the KSS, running until 1948. Whatever bikes or collections of bikes would you like to see us do a video on? Maybe you've got a bike we can use for a test ride. Either way, get in touch below. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.